Hello and welcome to 60 Minutes or Less, a podcast from Birthday Cake for Breakfast. I'm Andy Hughes and for episode 36, what a treat it is to have on Total Hero Barry Hyde, he of the Futureheads. Having had fellow Futurehead Ross Millard on for episode 23, it only made sense to interview Barry, particularly as in March 2025, Hyde released a new solo album in Miners Ballads via Sirenspire Records. A folk rock punk classical album about the coal mining heritage of the northeast of England, it features traditional collier lyrics and observes the dangers, difficulties and bravery that was a part of daily life for the miners. We also spoke of his tribute EP to the late Ivor Cutler, working with the Futureheads and the trials of making scotch eggs. If you like the episode, let us know. Follow us on your favourite streaming platform and follow Birthday Cake for Breakfast on all the socials. Right, on to Barry Hyde. Enjoy.
Hello.
All right, Barry, how you doing?
I'm good, mate. How are you?
Yeah, good. Cheers. Racing through some lunch. Then, where do we find you? Is it lunchtime rush at the pub?
I don't know. I am in the building, but I'm not. I don't really work in the pub. I hope it's busy. I'm up in the attic, which is recording studios. So I've been teaching
Okay.
that today.
Right. How's that all been going today?
Going well, yeah. I do a few hours on a Friday, but we've got now 70 students in the music school.
Oh wow.
Friday's a bit of a mellow day.
I heard you recently had a graduate as well.
Well, no, graduation, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
We had our first graduation in June. So obviously, you need to run your degree course for 3 years before you get your first graduation. So we'll have them every year. We also launched a master's degree in September. So we've now got 4 cohorts of students. So we'll probably have 2 graduations a year.
Oh, fantastic. Did you ever envision that when you were starting out in music yourself that you'd go on to have all this and be teaching kids and such?
Well, I started teaching before I formed the Futureheads. I started teaching the guitar when I was 15 at this amazing place called the Bunker. At the time, there was a youth project being ran from there, and it was all about songwriting. And that was where the Futureheads met. But that was my first taste of teaching, and then obviously became a professional musician, and then got back into teaching. When was that? About 15 years ago.
Mm.
So immediately kind of remembered how much I enjoyed it, and ended up doing a couple of. I did a BA and then a master's degree, and ended up becoming a lecturer. And some years ago, was approached by my then boss, now business partner, about setting up a music college. So we went around that long process. It took us 5 years to get the contract because we own the degree course, right? Like we wrote it. It's called Modern Music Industries, and the University of Sunderland are our partner. So they basically ratify the course because you can't declare yourself to be a university. You can't just say, I am a university.
Yeah, I was thinking that. I was like, that is really cool, but how does one go down that route?
You have to have a ratifying a university that's going to sign off on your course and say this is an equivalent of a degree course, or they have to make it into a qualification. And that was a long process. It was ridiculous, to be honest, like passing due diligence with the university. We thought it was never going to happen. I remember at one point we found some facilities, namely this building I'm in right now, which is called the Peacock. But it's a 4-story building, and 3 of them are used for business. And we had to fill out this questionnaire, and it was like, what would you do if the Peacock burnt down? Where would you deliver your course? And we're like, okay, we'd find somewhere else. And then they sent another one back saying, what would you do if the other place that you found burnt down? And we thought like it was going to go on forever. We managed to get it through the over the line, and it was exciting because, well, it was stressful because by the time we launched the course, this was at the back end of the pandemic when you weren't allowed to sing indoors, and no music festivals had all been cancelled for the year. So effectively, the real world music industry, which really is live music, the record industry is not what it was. Even 5 years ago, it's not what it was. And obviously, you go 20 years before that, 5 years ago, it was nothing like it was. So all we've really got is live music. People make records. It's important to make records, but you don't really make money from records. You make money from selling tickets and T-shirts. So we thought we'd basically ruined our lives, you know, by leaving our jobs. And then we managed to get a small cohort of students who signed up for the course. And we take it every year as it comes, but it's going well. It's going all right.
That's fantastic, Barry. I'm really sorry to do this. My bloody dog has chosen now to lose his tennis ball under the settee. Can you just give me 1 second to grab that? Is that all
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Sorry,
No
mate.
problem. No problem.
Sleeps all day, and then as soon as the interview starts, tennis ball scenario.
That's okay.
Classic dog behavior. You are, as well as the education stuff, obviously looking forward this month. You are going out of a jaunt with your boys, the Futureheads, shortly. I imagine that's a exciting prospect coming up.
Oh, of course it is. You know, like we as a band, as a kind of unit, as a gang, as a partnership, creativity, I don't think we've ever been happier than we are now. And that's because we have, I think, a very kind of well-developed attitude towards what the band is to us. For many years, obviously, we made our entire living out of being in a band. And, you know, I'm not saying that was negative, but when you're relying on your creativity to pay your bills, it changes your relationship with what your creativity is. And of course, it's not like you're making, I don't know, tables and you're just making a load of tables and selling them in shops because people always want tables. And it's not like that. You're making records and you're trying to sell them in a rapidly changing music industry. And there's all sorts of external factors that dictate whether or not an album is successful. It can be to do with comparison from past sales. And, you know, I do find generally that musicians and artists aren't very astute in business, maybe especially when they're young. And we were basically kids when we got record deals. And we were just kind of blown away by the fact that we were getting off a flight in Tokyo or Mexico or supporting the Foo Fighters at Wembley Stadium. It was all just like being in this kind of incredible dream. But ultimately, I think we took it as far as we could. And then we took a little break from the band. And when we got back together, we came in with still a lot of love for each other. That's the core material of a band, is the relationships. And when we get in the van, we're all happy to see each other. When we come to the rehearsal room, it's great. We love each other, you know, like we are bosom buddies. And going out on the road is very rare for us, really, you know, in our day-to-day lives. So we kind of cherish it. Although it's difficult to be away from home and all of that stuff, we do it quite seldomly, so we can really appreciate it. And we're really pleased to have released this singles collection with Cherry Red, which came out last year. And you know, it's not a new album, but it's a new record. You know, it's kind of like for us it feels like we're drawing a line between everything that we've done so far, and we now have an open highway to potentially to make new recordings, which is a very exciting prospect. But because of our lives, it's difficult to find the time to put in the hours, because it might take reasonably to make a half decent album. Maybe it's 200 to 300 hours. If you can do 10 hours a week, you know, then you're talking, you know, 7 months. Well, I wish we could afford 10 hours a week. So feasibly, if you want to make an album, it'll probably take us an entire year of consistent effort, which is difficult to muster when you're in your early 40s.
Yeah.
Well, mid 40s. But, you know, we're looking forward to getting on the road, man. We'll enjoy it. We're going to some cities that we really, really love. We love getting on stage.
That's fantastic. I suppose it would be easier to knock out a few tables per year rather than try and concentrate on a record. But yeah, different walk of life.
Exactly. But we are working on a special recording project at the minute, which we've managed to, I would say, get a good measure into. I can't mention what it is yet, but we have been publishing photographs on our social media of us in recording studio. So there is, at the minute, the motivation to do it. I think maybe it's getting out on the road. It'll help us to keep us inspired, because ultimately we appreciate that we're never going to be playlisted on Radio 1 again. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't remain with some kind of creative role. And we've got a fan base, you know, it's not a massive fan base. It's, you might call it a modest fan base or something like that. But I feel like there's enough people out there who have an interest in us to make it worth our while to make recordings, and especially to print them and to take them with us to venues and play them. I think we still have the privilege of doing that, and it will actually return in a business sense, so to speak, but mainly for just for the hell of it.
Yeah, that's really, that's really good to hear. And obviously, seen on the socials, you have got the new Futureheads recordings coming, which was great. And except for the fact that you couldn't see Jaff in the photos, it was good to see you all together. But as you
But
touched,
Jaff's the photographer.
he's taken the photos, yeah. So it was good to that at least Jaff was there in spirit, literally behind the camera. But in terms of the new record that you put out, as you say, it is a new record, but it's your history. We spoke with Ross about working on the artwork and going through posters and diaries and old charts that he had about harmonies and stuff. And one of the memories that he had, which I thought was really funny, was that when you did the debut record, it took so long with Andy Gill sometimes that you managed yourself personally to complete Tomb Raider on the PlayStation, which I thought was I think it's the only person I've ever heard that's ever completed Tomb Raider. But was it quite interesting going back through that process and picking up on all these records over the years and going through all that paraphernalia and what have you?
Well, that's, as you've mentioned, you know, that's very much like a Ross experience. Ross
Yeah.
collected everything, he kept everything. He has always had an interest in graphic design. You know, he's screen printer. He's always been like that, you know. And I mean, I love graphic design in and of itself, but I'm not much of a collector of things. I mean, I'll be honest and tell you that I don't have all of our albums on vinyl. I don't have them because I've had copies of them, but I've just given them away. I don't have much of a nostalgic savings account, so to speak. But Ross, thankfully, Ross he came in as a real music nerd. You know, he came in like I've never worn a band t-shirt of another band in my life, I don't think. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I don't collect memorabilia.
Yeah.
So the fact that Ross did all that gave us this real kind of cool, meaningful presentation of the album. Yeah, you know, like as I was saying, you know, like maybe towards the back end of the last era of our career, things were quite difficult for us. Maybe naturally the band's opportunities had run their course, and it took me a while to be able to view the band in any kind of positive nostalgic light. Because for me, whenever I thought about the band, it gave me a lot of mental challenges. Because I got to the point where I felt like, even though we hadn't, that we'd failed at something. It'd becoming an arena band or something like that. The music industry has a way of kind of distorting your self-worth, you know. And then when you're getting on the front covers of magazines and getting the attention, it's all great. But if that doesn't continue, there's some kind of, depending on your personality, some kind of emotional crisis ensues. And in the end, you know, like I had to basically leave the band for a while to get space from it. Needless to say, you know, the fact that when we reformed and were able to really just appreciate being in the band, for me now, it's hard for me to remember what I would class as the dark times of the band. I just think about maybe these opportunities that we might have coming, or the fact that we just love hanging out with each other, you know. And Decent Days and Nights, the singles, is a celebration of that. And yeah, it's like I really look forward to playing those songs, you know, like some of them we haven't played in a while. But you know, there's always something quite special happens when we go on stage. And I feel quite nervous these days gigging because we have to rehearse. When you're doing music full time, you don't rehearse. You make an album, then you go and tour it, and after 3 gigs, you'll never forget a note. And no, I'm not saying I've ever forgotten how to play Hounds of Love. That's never happened. I might have messed a couple of lyrics up now and then, but most of it's just pure muscle memory. But I think putting together this set and going to some cool cities that we love to go and hang out in is just going to be great. But I am excited about what the future might hold.
I do think as well, with you guys, it does seem so genuine. You can feel that love, I think, of you as a unit, from the start. Obviously, it helps with your own brother, but the fact that
Does
you're
it
all
help?
well, maybe that brotherly love at least. But
Yeah.
from a solo aspect, obviously want to talk about your new record that you've got coming out. But I found it really interesting that as well as these anniversaries with the Futureheads, it's 10 years this year since the release of your Ivor Cutler tribute record. And like that is amazing to see, those that combination of you doing Ivor Cutler. How did all that come about?
Well, to be honest, the Ivor Cutler EP, which is called Ivory Cutlery, was a module that I did at university. So I did when I was doing I think it might have been my master's degree. I think it was the master's. I had to do a couple of albums, and one of them I decided to do a tribute album to Ivor Cutler just because I love him. I'd already written some solo music for an album called Melody, but I don't know if Melody came out by that point. But I wanted to tie it in stylistically with that, so it's kind of like piano-based music. But yeah, it was simply something I did for uni, but I released it because that was part of the course. The module was all about the personal portfolio. So I did a self-recorded and produced this EP and put it out there, and that was what I had to do for the module. Rather than writing a load of songs, I just love those songs, and I wanted to do something with semi-orchestral arrangements, and it just seemed like quite an obvious thing to do.
As well as your Ivor Cutler record, as we said, you've got your new record coming out, Miners Ballads, and that was commissioned by art project developer Paul Emerson from the States and in
Yeah,
collaboration with Sunderland City Council. So how did
yeah.
it come together and what were the planning stages in terms of getting that record together and coming forward with this commission?
Well, I'd started doing commissions quite a few years ago. Like, there've always been local commissions, but the first thing I did was I wrote like a piece of music and recorded it to be used as like an anthem, you might say, for Sunderland's Music City campaign. No, sorry, it's not Music City, City of Culture. So that was the first time I was kind of paid to produce music for something other than the band. And just like everything in life, one thing happens and then that leads on to another thing. A band does a gig and then they do another one and then they get seen by a record label, blah, blah, blah. It's like that's how things develop. So I ended up meeting this guy called Paul Emerson, who is based in Washington, D.C. But Washington, D.C. has a historical connection to Sunderland because the Washington family were Northeast landed gentry. So George Washington's family have a town near us called Washington. So,
Right.
so there's a lot of cultural exchange between DC and Sunderland, and Washington DC is twinned with Sunderland. Sunderland's twinned with Essen and Saint Nazaire and Washington DC. So this guy is like doing art projects in Sunderland with some funding from America and the local council. And I met him because I've become known for doing commissions. I don't. One of the probably the most interesting one, if I'm honest, was for Durham Council, and I went into HMS. Sorry, not HMS. That's a ship. HMP Frankland, and did songwriting sessions in what's called the Pipe Unit, which is the psychiatric part of the prison, right? And I went in and did songwriting sessions with everyone in the room was serving at least one life sentence. Some of them had double life sentence. And I was in there with a security guard called Derek, who was like that. And I thought if it kicks off in here, I don't know how helpful Derek's going to be because he looked like Postman Pat, bless him. But obviously Derek, as they call him, Screws, was quite a shrewd man. But yeah, I'm doing like songwriting lessons with Serial Killer, and I'm like, wow, this is like these commissions are really interesting. I did another one for Paul Emerson where I had to write a performance piece in partnership with Sunderland College, all about we had the tall ships race docked in Sunderland in 2018, and I was commissioned to do a piece for that. And then when he was talking about this album, I thought, wow, this is actually getting commissioned to make an album, because usually it costs you money to make an album, but I kind of got paid a fee to put an album together, and there was no kind of like, it's got to be done by this point. You just like take your time. Took me a while to firstly have the time, and I started to research what the album might be, but it's all to do with the cultural heritage around coal mining in the northeast of England, which is obviously a huge part of it. A part that I've never experienced firsthand. So I decided to look into research of finding songs, folk songs, and I found some amazing songs from songwriters Jim Morland and Keith Gregson, and I found a book called Come All Ye Bold Miners, written by someone called A.L. Lloyd, which is an old hardback book. It cost a fair penny to buy it, actually, because there's not many of them. I think it cost me like £100 to buy this book. But I knew that if I had a book from the 70s with this kind of like almost like a dictionary of songs, that I'd find something in it. And I figured it was a good part of spending a bit of the commission money, So I got this book and started reading these songs, and there was no tunes in there. It was just lyrics. And then I spoke to my friend Keith Gregson, Keith Gregson's a retired historian, and he'd done like a piece in a ancestry magazine about me and my brother's ancestors, because we are performers, and our ancestors were in the circus, lion tamer, one of them. The other one was a horse master, an equestrian master. And he did this piece because there was a link to music, because in The Benefit of Mr. Kite.
Yeah, with all the
Benefit of Mr. Kite, there will be a show tonight on trampolines. The Hendersons will all be there. And it's basically John Lennon's written a song based on an old circus poster. But the Hendersons were also equestrian masters, and they had historical links to my ancestors, who were called the Newsomes. And the Newsomes still run a fairground up in South Shields up here. Yeah, Mr. Kite was friends with one of my ancestors. So Keith did this big piece, and found out that the lion that killed me great grandfather is stuffed in a museum in Leeds. So it's like, and then I told him about this project, and he went, "Oh, some of your ancestors were killed in the Trimden Grange disaster." I'm like, "What?" He's like, got the information out. Two of my ancestors died in the Trimden Grange explosion in 1882, and one of them was 12 and the other one was 14. So I suddenly, this project, which obviously sometimes commissions, it's difficult to make them a personal project, because you're kind of delivering something for someone else. You should always try and put yourself into it, but that can be challenging, when you're writing to order. But suddenly this project felt a lot more personal, because of the fact that some of my ancestors had died. And then I started to put together a narrative with the songs I'd chosen, which made it, for me, a more interesting creative project. And I ended up with this narrative about, it's like a love triangle between two villagers who are working in the colliery world. He's a miner. She's kind of like a young woman. They're planning to get married. And then the coal mine owner approaches her and tries to woo her. And this comes in a song called Collier Laddie, which is a song about him saying to her, if you come and be my wife, I'll give you all these hills. I'll give you all the rents from these houses. And she's like, I don't want your rents. I want to live in a terraced house with my Collier Laddie. And I just thought that was quite a lovely human story that I'd found, which kind of summed up maybe the strong community connections that existed around the coal mining world, even though it was an awful, dangerous job with a heritage of, for the most part, with coal mining and going further back with mineral mining. The miners were essentially slaves. because we've had mining since medieval times, but mines used to be owned by the church, and women and children and men used to work in the mines, and they had no choice. That's how they paid their rent. And over time, obviously, because of industries like coal mining, we end up with workers' rights, holidays, sick pay, pensions. All of these things come through these kind of difficult industries. And there's a song on the album called Come All Ye Colliers, which is a song about the forming of unions, wanting a better deal out of it all. So it became like almost like it felt or more like a musical, and that's the next project for it, is to try and make it into a musical, but that's probably going to take a few years.
That is really fascinating, particularly about, I knew the stuff about the ancestors in Trimden Grange,
Trinity, yeah.
1882, yeah, the song. And I gather this is, the case of you saying about, putting a personal approach to it. Was it kind of a sentimental, personal aspect, being able to put your own stamp on that family history?
A little bit, but I don't have any real knowledge of what it was like to be part of a coal mining community. So for me, the inspiration I always have with creative projects is not creating something that is terrible, creating something that I can hold up and say, I was part of this. In this, with a solo album, I can say I created this. With the Futureheads album, it's like we created this. But I feel like there has to be the real inspiration is just to make sure that you've really exhausted the creative challenges to try and make something unique. What I found interesting about the album was that I made it as a solo album, and for the most part, I was alone when it was recorded. I engineered it myself. I produced it, and I had a bit of help from others. Tommy Smith, who's a local musician, came in and did a bit of, just kept me company a bit. My brother Dave played a bit of percussion on it. I had Dave Brewis from Field Music mix and master it. And then I had a great bass line on a tune called Last Dance at the Landlord's Ball. My friend, who's a jazz musician who lives in Berlin, put this double bass part on from his recording studio in Germany and sent it over. And I just placed it in there. But for me, it was like I took on the challenge of engineering it as a learning curve to build up my experience as an engineer and as a producer. And I realized how forensic you have to be to come out with anything. Because sometimes you go and do a recording session and 45 minutes later, you still haven't got any sound coming through onto the mixing desk. And it's because there's a broken cable or the microphone's broken or the speakers aren't plugged in. And it's like it's not really creative. It's almost scientific. It's like, and I quite enjoyed building those skills. But certainly it felt like the story of the album went beyond being a transactionary album with someone external saying, "Can you do this?" For me to really put in a lot of pride and joy into what the album became.
It sounds like this is definitely the case. Did you get lost a bit in the research? Did you really put that head on, and did you really put, that hat on rather, and get lost completely in the research?
Yeah, I think you can over research, I feel like creative instinct is always there, but it's easy to end up ignoring it. And for me, it was like, and there was a few like, I wouldn't say mistakes. There was a few songs that I scrapped because in the end, I realized that it just wasn't working out. So I did go down certain directions that I had to walk back from. The hard thing with doing an album is just the sheer amount of time it takes to do the work, and the motivation needs to remain there. You can't burn yourself out with it. I was trying to do it whilst also doing a lot of teaching, and but I had much more of a hands-on role with the pub that me and my wife run. So I realized I needed to wait. I had to wait until the academic year ended, and then I had time because it's not like you can just go in. It's not like making a sausage roll where you get the ingredients and put them in a bowl and mix them up, and then you've got pastry, and then you put the meat in and chop it up and put it in the oven. It's not like that. The ingredients for a recording session, I don't know what they are, but like they're not always there. You sometimes have to go in and have a few dead days and allow that. So, I don't know how many hours I put into the album, but it was definitely, well, uncountable hours. And I managed to keep it going. It was quite lonesome, if I'm honest. I much prefer making music with others, especially the band, because there's that chemistry between people. And yeah, but it feels like a long time ago because I finished the album and then the Futureheads started making firm plans to release the singles collection. So my album got naturally kind of put on the back burner until it could have a little bit of a chance to have its own moment, which is going to be relatively soon.
I do like that analogy as well with the sausage roll. Going back into your time when you were working in a chef role, I imagine it was a lot easier spinning
I
plates
don't
in
know, man. Have you ever tried to make 50 Scotch eggs?
that.
Have you ever tried to peel 35 eggs and keeping them in shape? No. But I still do a bit of catering. But when we took the pub on, I was doing all the catering for the parties because we've got a 220 capacity music venue and also, well, it gets used for private parties too. And I was offering these elaborate buffets, like making rendang for like 75 people, triple fried chicken wings, salt and pepper fries, Scotch eggs, pies. And I'm like, what am I doing here? You know what I mean? Now we just get caterers to come and give them the buffets, and it saves me getting burnt, covered in oil, screaming at Scotch eggs when they've split in the oil.
I like to think, Barry, in 100 years, there'll be a concept album about Barry Hyde making Scotch eggs and pies. And
Have you ever made a Scotch egg?
no, I
I
can't.
recommend it. Maybe to make six. Don't try and make 60, but a Scotch egg is a thing of wonder, but it's not worth time, mate. It's not worth it as a business, but for pleasure, for a picnic. Yeah, you're gonna have the best picnic you can possibly imagine.
But from a creative endeavor,
No, not for like to pay your rent.
unless, yeah, someone's very keen on Scotch eggs. So, we were talking about so it's really interesting, the slave aspect and stuff, but the actual nitty-gritty of the task at hand. There's a
Yeah,
song on the album called Endless Ropes, and it
yeah,
deals in some really gruesome stuff, toes
yeah,
being,
yeah.
arms being ripped clean off.
Mm.
And it sounds like, like a public service broadcasting song in the way that it's got that audio clip taken from, historical archive. Did you uncover much in the way of that sort of archive material, in terms of like actual audio? And is there much on the cutting room floor in that respect?
Well, I did troll for particularly Sunderland-based kind of footage, etc., etc. And I did find a couple of short documentaries on the coal mining industry and the shipbuilding industry, mainly from like the mid 70s. And I was gifted that audio file from again my friend Keith Gregson. And the bloke who's speaking is Jim Morland. Jim Morland was a retired collier who became a teacher, a secondary school teacher, and he worked with my friend Keith. And they ended up forming a songwriting partnership, and they released a songbook called Just One Man, and that was from Woman's Hour. Jim got interviewed on Woman's Hour about his past as a miner, and obviously he's talking about how at the time he was an apprentice down at the docks. I think it was the docks or the shipyards, and he was getting paid X amount. But if you went into the mines, you got paid a lot more. And his dad was a collier, and he says to his dad, "I want a job." He's like, "You're going to regret it, but I'll take you down on Monday." And he did eventually regret it, but he's talking about a few of the more interesting human sides of it. For example, the ponies, these poor pit ponies that lived underground and went blind, had a sixth sense for instabilities within the mine shafts. And if you were ever struggling to get your pony to move, it was probably because there was going to be a collapse imminently, because they could sense something was going to happen. And this kind of legendary aspect of the culture is obviously quite fascinating and almost romantic, really. And then, of course, the story about people being maimed or killed in the mines. Then discovering things like if a mine shaft went down and the Marquis of Londonderry owned it, he used to just seal it up because it was cheaper than getting the bodies out. So that type of treatment of people, obviously something that we can think of as being absolutely disgusting now, but at the time it was just accepted. But yeah, the Endless Ropes was inspired by this piece of music by a composer called Gavin Bryars. He did this great piece, and I think it was in the late 80s, called Jesus Blood. And it was essentially a sample of a homeless man sitting outside of Elephant and Castle tube station singing a song, and he put it on a loop, and it's only, I don't know, two lines. Jesus blood never failed me yet, never failed me yet. Jesus blood never failed me yet. And he looped that and wove in this arrangement around it. Ended up being like 35 minutes long. Same melody from this homeless guy, but this incredible, beautiful kind of chamber orchestra. And I thought it would be nice to have an audio clip of someone who was there, because I've never worked in the coal mines. I had a paper round, which I used to enjoy. My hands used to get dirty from the ink, but I didn't used to come all home covered in coal soot. So for me, it was almost like an artifact to put in there, not only to give the album that feel, but also to have a little break from traditional song structures, which is what most of the songs are. And I did a kind of like ambient background to it, again, to give the album a different moment. And I quite enjoyed that, because my tendency with songwriting is to use very classical or classic songwriting structures, and, introductions, verses, bridges, middle eights, modulations. This was like not a song, but a piece of atmosphere. And yeah, I was lucky to have been given that, because I feel like it does lend itself well to the album.
It's definitely, like you say, it's not so much a break, but it kind of does perfectly sits there in the middle of the album, doesn't it? And
Yeah.
allows the rest of the album to flow. I did think it was really interesting as well. You mentioned the ponies. It's a really bittersweet on the record about something that could be lost to time, that sort of telling about these tales and such. And it is just a really sad idea, isn't it, about what happened to the ponies? Question mark, because
Yeah,
they moved in a different way with the way they did the mining, and that means
yeah.
they don't need the ponies anymore as such. And it is just, yeah, like a completely interesting thing to consider on the record. Was there a number of things that came up where, as you say, you've had to chop some stuff away and stop yourself from
Yeah.
going down certain routes?
Mhm.
But was there stuff like that, where you were like, oh, that's so interesting, it must go on the record?
I think what I hope I've done is to put together a song collection that gives different viewpoints of certain aspects of what it was like to be involved in that world. Try and evoke the tragedy of the aftermath of a coal mining disaster via an instrumental piece, going into a great song I found by Tommy Armstrong, also known as the Pitman's Poet, about the explosion in which some of my ancestors died, which is kind of like a secret track on the album at the very end. It's an a cappella piece. Also trying to give like a sense of the energy behind the courage that the mining communities gained when they started to want better rights, the unification, the self-esteem that allowed these communities to rise up and get a better deal. Or maybe it's the harshness of that world as well. Like what happened to the ponies it's a kind of loving song, but it's about the truth, the brutality of the fact that when these animals were done with, they used to send them off and turn them into glue. That kind of Victorianism, that harshness, if you were left-handed, they used to tie your hand down at the desk and make you forced to be right-handed. This like these kind of small facts about the culture then, which seems so alien to us now. That era was the society was full of that type of thing, and it became quite an enjoyable experience when I realized that's what I wanted the album to be. I started to pull in songs like the Putter's Lament, which is like about actually what the job is, filling the tubs and working with the ponies. And the ponies are, if a pony skidded on you, that meant that you had to go for a bath definitely when you got home, because some ponies were just like difficult to work with. If you and they used to, there was a lot of love in the community, but ultimately every single moment they were at work, their lives were at risk, and they were, some far below the Earth's surface. They're down a miles out under the sea. That's where they're working in darkness with a little lamp. Can you imagine? It's incredible.
And to take poor ponies down there as well, it is, yeah, the lyric that you say, it is a really lovely piece of work, that song. And, saying that, as you say, they're sent to the knacker's yard, what
The
happened to
knackers,
them?
yeah,
Yeah. Is
yeah,
it they've gone from the smell of mown grass to this and
yeah,
what
yeah.
have you? Yeah, it's a lovely song. And in
Well,
terms
that
of,
was a Jim Morland song. So the chap who's singing, sorry, speaking on the Endless Ropes, that was one of his lyrics. He
yeah.
wrote that. You know what I mean? Like he wrote a few of them, and I kind of wanted to present them with a kind of a bit maybe retro feel, like kind of Valve sounds, nice bit of saturation, but try and make something that had a relative like modern rock-ish folk, something in between like my solo work and maybe the Futureheads more acoustic moments that we do when we're singing a cappella and getting like the acoustic guitars out and the pianos and stuff like that, like something that fits into it. But it became like a really enjoyable creative experience in the end once I found a way into the project.
And in terms of the track, The Miner's Life, similarly, that's come from a traditional collier lyric, which you've then created a musical arrangement around. Was it adding in these different aspects? Was it kind of like a blank canvas when it came from a musical standpoint in terms of some of the songs?
Well, what I did on that one was when I released my first solo album, Malody, I think it was in 2016, maybe. And on it, there's a song called Crazy Love, which is a lyric that I wrote, but I based it around the first prelude in C major by Johann Sebastian Bach. So I took the chords that he effectively wrote, but his pieces are arpeggiated, right? The notes are separate. So I put it into a chord progression and wrote a melody over it. And on the Miner's Life, I wanted to do a similar thing. So I used the cello suite in G major by Johann Sebastian Bach, which is a very famous. If you go on his Spotify, it's interesting because he's known for making very elaborate music, but his top, his most listened to is all his most simple ones, and they're the only ones I can play because I'm not classically trained. So this piece by him called the Cello Suite in G, again, it's like an arpeggiated cello part, and I got the sheet music and worked out what it would be chords wise, and used that as part of the palette, and then added additional chords and all of that, like, but that was kind of like a starting point because I could never write a chord progression as good as that, not in a million years, because he's like one of the greatest, so for me it was like an arrangement task rather than a creative task. I did write a few chords in it though.
Yeah. I love the idea, by the way, of Sebastian Bach having a Spotify account. That just seems so
Of
funny.
course he does, of course he does, he's still very popular.
Yeah. So, in terms of, this chat, it's really evident that even though it was a commissioned piece, it's something that you've really sunk your teeth into, and it's absolutely something that you've had so much interest in. Are there any other particular subjects or concepts that you could consider, becoming involved in, or is it a case of waiting for the phone to ring and them saying, here's, something about Sunderland in this period or what have you?
Well, I mean, there is another commission via the same channels on the horizon, perhaps. A very different type thing. I've only just found out about it, so I can't really say much on it, but it will be to do with the stage, some kind of stage show, musical type thing. I'm also trying to, well, I put together, I'm working with a few people to try and make a musical around the topic of this album, the real kind of narrative, the love triangle narrative, and the landlord trying to woo the girl, and the big disaster at the end, and she still won't go with him, even though her fiance's died down the mines because she embodies the cultural values and the community values that maybe you could say was the one of the great things about the coal mining time. For me, it's like I need a project. It doesn't need to be commissioned. I'm talking to a local organizer about getting involved with the brass festival that happens up in Durham every year, about doing a performance, working with a brass arranger to do a performance of the album with a full colliery band,
Right.
which will be cool and that's in the Miners Assembly Hall in Durham. So that would be like, work really well. And it'll give me a chance to do some brass arrangements and learn from that because it's not something I've really done before. So that could be a potential thing. And if I did that, I would probably record it and maybe put it out in some capacity. I don't know if it'd be printed in vinyl, but maybe just put it out there with this album. I'm going to be doing a couple of gigs, not a lot, like I'm not much of a tourer these days. When the band was in a hiatus, I was doing quite a lot of solo gigs, especially after I found out that my then girlfriend was pregnant. I'm like, I'm gonna have to get the savings account up here because I learned how to drive. I got a driving license, and then I booked a gig 2 weeks later in Brighton. So after driving for only 2 weeks, I drove from Sunderland to Brighton by myself with a massive 10 stone digital keyboard. And I found myself down in Brighton driving around on the motorway late at night in the rain, thinking, "Oh my God, this is really dangerous. I barely know how to drive." Um, so I associate solo gigs with like stress, really. I will do a couple, but I feel like this is more about just getting the album out there, maybe doing a few special projects around it. I mean, I'd love to work with an orchestra, like a real orchestra. In fact, it was almost the case that our local orchestra, the Sunderland Symphony Orchestra, almost became a rehearsal tenant in our venue. They came with a tape measure. They almost took it on. It was going to be like every Wednesday night, there was going to be an orchestra rehearsing in this building, but it didn't happen. They ended up taking on a church because it wasn't quite big enough to fit in all the percussion. Plus, we didn't have any storage, so it was going to be a right nightmare for them. But I'd love to make an album or an EP or a big work that uses an orchestra. Like I feel like it would be a great challenge. Maybe try and write some kind of like symphony or something like that. But I don't know. I think that would be a worthy challenge to do. Bit of a learning curve.
Yeah. I love the idea of an orchestra turning up to the practice space with a
Oh,
single
I know exactly.
measuring tape as well, and the whole load of them trying to fit in.
The real shame it didn't happen because, as far as I'm aware, classical musicians love a pint of ale. So we probably could have made a fortune from them selling them ale after the rehearsal, but never mind.
But that is great, Barry. Thank you so much for talking with me, and I really appreciate it. And it's a lovely piece of work.
Thank you.
Yeah, really appreciate it. I did spy you did some preview shows with the Brewis brothers at Pop Rex and
Well,
Sounds.
yeah, I did a gig because I kind of wanted to honor the commission, and I knew that the album wasn't going to be coming out for a while, but I felt like it was going to be worthwhile to put on a gig and invite the council down and stuff like that, to kind of show them what it might be like live. And I had my brother and the Brewis brothers, and we called it the Band of Brothers, which is like pretty kind of obvious. But yeah, we had several rehearsals, and doing a one-off gig of new material, it's quite labor intensive because they're not. Some of them are fairly straightforward songs, but like it's just like rehearsal. The point of rehearsal is to walk away with confidence to be able to go on stage, and we had just enough time to rehearse the songs well enough to feel like we could present them live. And we did the gig at the fantastic venue Pop Rex, which is down the road from here. And the gig sold out, and it was a real honor for me to be on stage with my brother and Pete and Dave. It was a fantastic honor because these are the best musicians I know. And we've done music together for years. I mean, many years ago, we were in a band, all four of us together, called the Electronic Eye Machine. which was like some of the, I don't know if any of the songs made it onto Field Music Records, but it was Pete and Dave's band, and I was on guitar, Dave was drumming. And this band became the New Tellers, New Tellers became Field Music kind of. So it had been maybe 20 years, more, 25 years since we'd all been on stage together. I'd love to do that again, but it's like I don't know if we have the time to really present it in that way. I might just do a couple of solo gigs and strip it right back and do like a kind of one of those shows where there's a lot of insight into the songs, the themes behind them and all of that, and present it maybe with an acoustic guitar or a piano or something like that, which I think I could pull off without having to spend like 50 hours.
Yeah, preparing it, yeah. But the idea of you and Dave and Peter and Dave together on stage sounds superb. I wish I'd been there. But yeah, thank you, but
Well,
thank you.
I don't know if you're aware of this, but it might be of interest to you. Peter and Dave and my brother Dave and Andy Moore, who was one of the original members of Field Music, are
Yeah.
doing a Doors tribute band
Are
for a
they?
laugh. Yeah, because Andy can do all that diff really tricky organ work,
Yeah.
and you've got your brother on drums, and they had a rehearsal and recorded it, and Dave showed me it, and it sounds fucking amazing, like. And they're doing a gig at the Peacock in May, and it's sold out in less than 12 hours. So that's going to be the next time any Hydes and Bruces are on stage together. I won't be on stage though.
God, that
Uh,
sounds amazing. Funnily enough, they didn't mention it when they were in Manchester last night, Field Music. Yeah, that sounds insane.
yeah, they're called the Fire Doors.
That makes complete sense. Yeah.
I think why not? Like we did a Queen tribute recently for charity, and we had Peter was Roger Saylor, Jaff was we called him Eddie Mercury. No, Eddie Mercury. Dave Bruce was Spike Edney. Ross was on bass. John Bishop and I was Brian maybe. And we all got dressed up. And part of this gig that we raised over £50,000 for a local charity. And it was amazing. And we did Radio Gaga. I had to learn the guitar solo to Bohemian Rhapsody. It was wild. Yeah, but it's good. Things like that, like they're like fantasy moments, to be honest, because when you start out, it's all fantasy. It's like you want to be Hendrix or you want to be Jimmy Page or something like that. And then you could become an artist. And but what you really crave is to kind of play the great songs of others in the right context. And the Doors, I absolutely love the Doors, and I feel like if they wanted to, they could probably do the Doors tribute a lot more. It just depends on how they feel about it when they're on stage, really. But yeah, I hope they are going to record it, so there will be evidence of it. I think they're going to put together a video, so you might see that one day.
Such an insane but brilliant prospect.